Well, the military mission in Iraq, a tough domestic anti-terrorism law coming on Friday. Let's bring in three members of Parliament to talk about this. James Bezan is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defence. Jack Harris is the defence critic for the official opposition. Wayne Easter is the public safety critic for the Liberal Party. Mr. Bezan, let's begin with the mission in Iraq. Whether it was intended to be or not, has this become a combat mission for the 69 Special Forces soldiers on the ground in Iraq?
No, it hasn't. It's still aid and assist, the way we said right from the get-go. They have had three unfortunate circumstances when they've been near the front line with Iraqi security forces, helping with the command and control, scoping out operations when they've had the unfortunate situations where they've come under attack and they've had to fire back and defend themselves and eliminate those risks. So we're proud of them for what they've done. We're going to continue to help out with the Iraqi security forces, and from the briefing that we saw today, we're starting to see Iraqi security forces, the training has come into fruition, and they are being more successful in gaining ground back and taking control of critical locations and infrastructure, and have control over certain areas of the country now that previously was under the control of the terrorists with ISIL.
What is the significance of how this mission is described? So, I mean, so what if it's a training mission that occasionally calls for Canadian Special Forces to defend themselves by engaging the enemy in combat? Why is that important?
Well, first of all, the mission as it was set forth to the Canadian people, both in Parliament and outside of Parliament, was that this was no troops on the ground, no boots on the ground. Our forces would not be involved in combat, essentially an air mission only. And that was very, very important to the government. It was very, very important to Parliament. Now we're saying this, you know, if it looks like a duck and walks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And when you put your special ops forces in the line of fire, in the line of machine gun fire, where, you know, when these scenarios were laid out to the Prime Minister, to the Minister of Defence, to the Chief of Defence Staff, it was all denial. No, this is non-combat. Don't you worry about that. And now we've got that going on. So it's a credibility issue. If it's a mission that this government is now involved in, you know, other countries aren't doing this. I'm just reading a story in the Washington Post today said U.S. commanders don't have their ground troops calling in airstrikes. That's considered by them as a part of a combat thing that they've been trying to avoid. They're telling their people the same thing.
Okay.
Just as Canadians have, so we're not being upfront and honest with Canadian public.
Mr. Easter, what's the Liberal Party view on this mission and the fact that Canadian trainers are exchanging fire with Islamic State fighters?
Well, we were supportive of the training of Iraqi forces, but the problem here is the line that the government spoke in the beginning. It was our understanding they wouldn't be at the front lines. We support our troops, and if they have to defend themselves, they have to defend themselves, and I'm sure they will do a good job of doing that. But it's the government itself and its credibility that is on the line here. We support our troops, but the government has not been honest with Canadians in terms of the full extent of this mission. That's the problem.
Okay, and why is that important now? I mean, why do you think Canadians should be concerned? Is it just the credibility issue?
It's a credibility issue on the one hand, but if you're going to ask Parliament and Canadians to be supportive of Canadians and of the troops and Canada in a war effort, then be honest and upfront with us. Don't play these kind of games. And the minister clearly was caught short on what he said to committee and what was said in this House. They're changing their messaging today by the minister in the House of Commons, but they're a little late doing that, and the government's credibility has been very much undermined. What about the next stake they go into? Will we believe them then?
Mr. Bezan, I guess, Mr. Bezan, should the government have said last fall, and the Defense Department have said last fall that, look, we're going to have a training mission of Iraqi forces. It's going to begin well behind the wire, but it then may become a training mission at the front that could have Canadian soldiers involved in firefights with the enemy.
Look, we've said right from the get-go, and I've said on this show before with you, Peter, I've said it in the House, is that this is about aid and assisting. This isn't just about training. This is about planning. This is about command and control, and we're doing all of that. And sometimes you have to go to the front. And as it was revealed last week by General Rouleau, is that about 20% of their time is at or near the front line. So they're there, they're scoping out, they're observing, and providing the advisory role to Iraqi security forces, and particularly the Kurdish Peshmerga.
Okay, I'll let you. But to Mr. Harris's point, are we doing what other countries aren't? calling in airstrikes with our special forces on the ground?
I can't speak to other countries what they're doing, and I know that Jack likes to get all his information from the Wall Street Journal. He's been quoting it for the last week and a half. But I also got to correct him.
I think he said the Washington Post.
Or Washington Post. But at the same time, he wants to quote American media. But at the same time, he also said that we were supposed to be only in air combat, not special operations forces. Special operations forces, the 69 were approved, and they're way before we even made the mention of airstrikes. We went to, when it became a combat mission, that's when we got parliamentary approval, and I can tell you that the Canadian Armed Forces in their operations are respecting the spirit and the context of the motion that was carried in the House of Commons.
Mr. Harris, what about that?
It's also, it's all about credibility, but it's also about mission creep. Canadians weren't told that this was going to happen. Not at all.
Said it
in fact,
without risk.
Whenever it was asked, like in the House on September 30th by Mr. Mulcair to the Prime Minister, what about painting targets? What about being on the front lines? No, we're non-combat all the way, and made it very clear to the Canadians watching that this wasn't going to be happening. Now it is happening, and that's what's going on here. Mission creep is very important. Let's not forget that the Vietnam War, the Americans sent in advisors. That was the big deal. We're sending in several thousand advisors, military advisors, and look what happened in the end. So when we don't trust what the government is telling the people of Canada, we don't know where this is going, and that is certainly a worry.
Okay, Mr. Easter, go ahead.
Well, the bottom line here is, can you trust and can you have confidence in what the government says? Obviously, you can't. What they said initially has now changed, and I want to emphasize again, of course Canadian troops have the right to defend themselves. They have to. We've seen some of that happen in the past where they weren't able to, and it had dire consequences. So they're able to defend themselves. But the ones that call the shots here in terms of the mission itself, the initial mission, was the Government of Canada, and continually we're finding you can't trust them. James goes after Jack for listening to or reading some of the American media. You can get more information and more accurate information out of the American media than you can from the Minister in the Health. So that's the problem here.
Let me move on to one other topic here. On Friday, the government will introduce legislation to give police and security agencies more powers to try to prevent terror attacks here at home, including lowering the threshold for detaining suspects and by criminalizing the promotion of terrorism. That's what we expect to hear. Mr. Bezan, why does the government believe these measures are needed now?
Well, look, we know that we are been threatened. We've had attacks here at home now. We're concerned about everything from lone wolf attacks to suicide bombings, anything that is possible. Again, just earlier today, there was another video that came out from the Middle East, from ISIL, saying that they're going to attack Canada. So we have to give all the tools possible to our police agencies, our intelligence services, so that they can protect Canadians first and foremost, that we can stop this homegrown jihadism here on our own soil. We got to put an end to all the promotion of terrorism, the recruiting for terrorism, and those that want to travel abroad for terrorism. So we have a lot of work here to do. There is holes that need to be filled, and we're going to do that.
Mr. Harris, does the NDP support these kind of proposals? We haven't seen the details of the bill yet, but in principle, do you support where the government's headed here?
I think we need to look at the legislation, obviously, before we know what they're doing, and look at whether or not it'll be effective. I mean, some of the laws that at least we're hearing speculation about have been in place in France and Europe for many years. It didn't stop what happened in Paris and hasn't stopped in other events. But there's another part of this that I don't hear much talk from this government on, even though they've had requests, for example, from the Somalia community in Edmonton, writing the Prime Minister asking for help in dealing with their youth who need help to set programs up. The Muslim community in Hamilton has said the same thing. There needs to be resources. There needs to be an opportunity for a counter-narrative to develop among potentially vulnerable groups, and some resources put into it. We're not hearing anything about that public safety aspect of it, which is extremely important.
Mr. Easter, let me hear you on this.
Well, what we're hearing from the Prime Minister is a lot of talk, and I find his talk is often very deceptive. We'll see the legislation when it comes in. I've been asking for months why the government and why the police authorities and security agencies are not utilizing the current laws that are available. There is preventive arrest. There is peace bonds. Preventive arrest has only been used recently. There's Section 83 of the Criminal Code that has got very serious charges for those that have went or attempted to go even and fight with entities that we consider terrorist entities abroad.
Okay, so as a former Solicitor General, are you convinced these extra measures are needed?
Look, we'll have to hear from witnesses. I think there may be some extra measures needed. We need answers on why the current laws that are in place are not being used, and we will have to hear from the police authorities and others what they're saying in terms of other measures that may be needed. We're open-minded and we're willing to look at it. But one last point. We do need in Canada parliamentary oversight. That was supported by an all-party committee in 2005. We're the only one of the Five Eyes countries that do not have parliamentary oversight to watch over our agencies on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, gentlemen, appreciate your time on a topic we'll continue to follow in the days ahead. Thanks for taking the time tonight.
You're welcome. Thanks, Peter.
Good.